I'm Caroline Stickland and I'm the CEO at Transport for All. Transport for All is the disabled-led group focused on access to public transport, private transport and street space for the 14.6 million disabled people who live across the UK. And we believe disabled people should be able to make their journeys with the same level of confidence, independence and ease as everyone else. We work towards that goal by providing support to disabled people in our community directly through our casework service, through influencing policy, guidance and legislation, through working directly with the transport industry, local authorities and operators, and by trying to raise awareness in society of the barriers that disabled people face to moving around. Today I want to talk about the transport accessibility gap, what the reasons are for that gap, and how we can all take action to try to reduce it. So the transport accessibility gap is the fact that disabled people make 38% fewer journeys than non-disabled people every year. So this includes many older people who are disabled, but it's also important to note that working age adults and children may well be disabled too. This accessibility gap has an impact on our community's opportunities and life chances. So 26% of disabled people feel that local public transport provision limits access to employment opportunities. It also impacts on our ability to get to places of education, places of worship, and other cultural and community locations. At Transport for All, we position our work under the social model of disability. And the social model is a different way of thinking about disability, about access barriers, and about the work that can be done to remove those barriers. Under the social model, we believe that people are disabled by society and by those barriers that exist, such as barriers to moving around or barriers to accessing a mode of transport. And this is the problem rather than anything inherent to our minds or our bodies, which might mean that we have different access needs or different communication needs. And this is an important concept to use when we're thinking about transport because it shifts the focus from individuals and what might be wrong or not working with our minds or our bodies to actually being about the world and society and the systems, structures and schemes that have been designed and created. So if a train station doesn't have a lift access to the platform and therefore is not step-free, the problem isn't that an individual is a wheelchair user or has limited mobility. The problem there is that a lift hasn't been put in or ramp access hasn't been put in. And it's much, much easier to change that barrier, to remove that barrier by installing step-free access than it is to think about every individual and on specific access needs. I'd also urge everyone thinking about these issues to take what we call a pan-impairment approach. So the disabled community in the UK is vast and diverse, with 14.6 million people spanning different cultures, different socioeconomic backgrounds, different ethnicities, genders and sexualities. And no two disabled people will have the same experience or have exactly the same access requirements, even if we share an impairment. And only 8% of disabled people are wheelchair users. So we really need to think holistically about the different access requirements and different access barriers that our community faces. So what are some of those barriers to transport that are responsible for the transport accessibility gap? Well, I've grouped them into 4 different areas, which I'll run through briefly here. Financial barriers are those that relate specifically to the increased cost of living with disability. So research from Scope has shown that disabled people face over £900 extra costs per month than non-disabled people. And this translates through to transport too. We may need to travel with a personal assistant or a carer and therefore have to pay extra for an extra ticket. If we use adapted cycles as a mobility aid, a good quality adapted cycle may cost up to £6,000. Many disabled people have to buy other mobility aids, such as good quality wheelchairs. The second category of barriers are the more obvious, perhaps, ones of physical and infrastructure barriers. This might be to do with lack of step-free access, as I mentioned before, but also a lack of places to sit and rest for those of us with energy impairments, or the proliferation of street clutter or street furniture for people who can't see those items of clutter or find it difficult to navigate around them. Thirdly, we face communication and information barriers, such as a lack of information that's accessible to visually impaired people, or very complicated and jargony transport-related information that might be a barrier to people with learning disabilities. And lastly, it's important to note in this context the engagement barriers that can be a barrier to accessing transport. So, for example, a transport consultation that relies on only online engagement to collect responses, or that uses lots of abbreviations or jargon to talk about what a local authority might be planning, or a consultation that has a very short turnaround time for responses, which can be a barrier for disabled people who are managing perhaps complex health and care needs. So we want to see action taken by STBs and others to remove these barriers to transport however possible. And we feel that removing these barriers really ties into the theme of transport justice that we've heard about already in the conference. And justice goes beyond simply access. So it's not just removing those barriers so that we can make the journeys we want. It actually means involving disabled people and disabled-led organisations in giving us equal involvement in how decisions are made in our local areas and nationally, from the very first design stage all the way through to the design, delivery and implementation and evaluation of services and schemes. And justice goes beyond rights. We've had equal rights to experience of transport since the Disability Discrimination Act and then the Equality Act of 2010. But we do still see this transport accessibility gap continuing, and an inequality of experiences between disabled and non-disabled travellers. So we really need to dig into what is the reason for that and how can we remove those barriers and improve that equity of experience. So my question today is to STBs and all others who hold power and influence in designing and delivering our transport schemes and services. And it's to ask, how can you take action to help remove the barriers that I've talked through? That might be through your direct influence. It might be through influencing upwards to government or other power holders, outwards across the industry, and also across your local areas. On this slide are some ideas for what those solutions might be. The first one is to name it. So acknowledge that transport in your region does need to be made more accessible. Before today, I had a read through the publicly available STB transport strategies, and of the 5 which I could find out of the 7 STBs, disability was mentioned an average of 2.6 times per strategy. That's not enough, I don't think, to properly acknowledge what the barriers are and to detail what the solutions will be and what the actions will be taken in each STB to really make change. So name it. Don't be afraid of talking about accessibility and disability. It's one of the ways that we can make sure that change happens. Also, read about it, find out more, listen to people with lived experiences. Have a look at Transport for All's reports, Pave the Way and the Disabled Citizens Inquiry, which are both linked through from our website. Ask, listen and act. So seek out the viewpoints of disabled people. Don't just assume that you know what we want or what we need or what we can and can't do. And then act. Once you've heard those concerns and those ideas, make sure that you're actually putting into place what you've heard or explaining perhaps why you can't do what you've been asked to do. Remember the diversity of the disabled community. As I said already, we're not all the same. So co-produce, design solutions with disabled people and organisations that have expertise rather than acting for us. Really importantly, pay for disabled people and our time in the same way that you will do that with other specialist consultancies. And be an ally. You may or may not have your own lived experience, but you can certainly play a role in increasing the engagement in your area of your region with disabled people and making sure that these barriers are removed and the transport accessibility gap is closed. Thank you for the opportunity to present our views and our perspectives to you today. Please do reach out via our website or through emailing projects@transportforall.org.uk if you'd like to discuss further.